If you want huge low end in your mix, then this video is for you. Welcome back to the Band Guide. I'm your band guy, Colin, and today we're looking at how to mix electric bass guitar, more specifically, 4 tips for huge low end. Now, before we get into it, I want to give you something. If you're struggling to get a mix that you're proud of, that you're happy with, I put together a simple checklist that's really going to help you out. It walks through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how you can do them wherever it is you're making music, whether it's Logic or GarageBand or Pro Tools. This 6-step guide is going to walk you through exactly what you should be doing to get those same 6 steps that all professional mixes have. It's completely free from link in the description below. It's already helped out thousands of people, so it could definitely help out you, so be sure to pick it up. Again, completely free. But let's go and get into the video where we're looking at 4 tips for huge low end from your electric bass guitar. Now, here we have an electric bass guitar. This is just a clean tone, and I'm happy with the tone as a whole. It's not like a gross tone or anything, but let's just listen to it for a second. So yeah, good electric bass tone, but I want more low end out of it, right? This is just a clean tone. It doesn't have as much low end as I want in the song if you listen to it in the context of this mix. I can hear it, it's in there, but it's not really giving me the girth and the low end that I want. So the first tip that I have for you is don't be afraid of huge EQ moves. Let's go and pull up the EQ that I've set on this bass. And you can see here, it's kind of extreme. I have a 12 dB boost from 80 hertz and below, or 66 hertz and below technically with a shelf. I've set a high pass filter just to make sure that the low end doesn't extend on forever into the low end. I've done a huge 10 dB cut at 150 hertz, a huge 8 dB cut at 400 hertz, a big old bump up here at 1200 hertz or around 1000 hertz. And then I've cut out all the super high frequencies. Listen to this just in solo. I'm going to have this on and then I'll click it off. So this is with the EQ on. If I turn it off, let's go back to that same point. It's just kind of boxy, kind of nasally, right? We put it back on. We start to really get that low end. Now, obviously, it's going up to a higher part there, so there's not as much low end, but generally speaking, we're bringing in the low end from that part. So that's tip number 1, is don't be afraid of these huge EQ moves. And I would encourage you to focus on kind of these 4 areas. The sub range, which is typically really anything 60 hertz and below. It can really go up to kind of 100 hertz, but somewhere in that range, everything here and below. And then somewhere around 150 hertz tends to be a little bit muddy. And then somewhere around 400 hertz can tend to be a little bit boxy. So start with those 3 frequencies, and then if you need more presence out of the bass, you need to cut through the mix a little bit more, then look around 1000 hertz. A little bit of a bump there can really help you out. So that's tip number 1, don't be afraid of huge EQ moves, and that kind of feeds perfectly into tip number 2, which is the Pultec EQ trick. So I'm going to go and pull up a Pultec style EQ. This is the just stock vintage tube EQ that's in Logic. If you're not working in Logic, then you can get something like Analog Obsessions Rare, which is a tube style EQ here, and specifically emulating a Pultec style EQ. And the trick here is if we look at these bottom 3 knobs, these 3 knobs are dealing with the low end, the super low end, where we're going to get that heavy low end in our mix. And the Pultec trick is basically boosting and cutting at the same frequency at the same time. So a Pultec basically has a boost knob and a cut knob, and they technically are at the same frequency, but the way they actually land is a little bit different. And so by boosting and cutting at the same frequency, we get a little bit of the Pultec tube circuitry, and we also get just a bit of a shift that lowers the frequencies going on with our source, basically. It's a little bit of a complicated, confusing process, but it's very simple to set up. It's basically boost and cut around the same frequency. Trust your ears, trust your judgment. In this case, I'm doing it around 60 hertz to get the real low end boosted, and I'm boosting and cutting fairly aggressively. So listen to this on, and then I'll flip it off. Right? If we go back to that same point and I take that off, add it back on. I mean, it's just crazy. You can really feel in the super low end in your mix. And if we listen to it in the context of the mix, if I have that on and then turn it off. Tell me it's real, baby, I'll believe you. Tell me this heals and I'll never leave you. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Like it just helps. As soon as you turn on, it's almost like an octave like gets dropped into the low end of the mix. So the Pultec EQ trick, and also kind of combining that with tip number 1, which is don't be afraid of huge moves. As you can see, I'm doing a pretty big boost and cut here. So Pultec EQ move, it can be huge. It can really, really help out. Okay, the third tip is nothing crazy. This isn't anything new, but it's just important that I mention, and that is that you want to compress. If you are adding a bunch of low end in your mix and you want your low end to be consistent, compression is super, super important. If you don't compress, then the low end is going to have these big peaks and valleys where it hits hard here and then it's way too quiet over here. So compressing your low end, your bass source, is really important if you want your low end to just sit comfortably in the mix. So here I'm just using the stock Logic compressor, and I've set it with a fairly fast attack time. Fairly fast is kind of a medium release time, and then I'm just compressing until I get enough compression that it's always containing the bigger hits. So you just kind of have to watch your meter and then use makeup gain so you're not losing any volume from it. If we go back to the start here, we can just see what's going on with this compressor. So we can see it's compressing more on the louder sections, less on the quieter sections. The total aggregate of that is that the low end is just going to be a little bit more consistent and even throughout. That way it doesn't feel thin at times and overly powerful at other times. So yeah, you got to compress. It's tip number 3. And the final tip is to separate out your sub. Now, this is not something you have to do on every song. I only do it if I need to, but I really needed to for the intro of this song because I actually wanted to pan my bass. So the idea here is that you just have an EQ on your main bass that's cutting out all the low end, and then you duplicate the track and have the exact same track. So we can see here these tracks are identical, but on this second track, we set an EQ that's doing the exact opposite, where it's cutting out all the high end. And then now this is just a sub only track, and I'm using this in conjunction to create this kind of sub track that sounds like this. Just a sub track. There's nothing to write home about it, but it's just separating out these sub frequencies. And the reason I'm doing that in this case is that it allows me to pan the bass in a really interesting way in the intro. So if you want to pan your bass ever, I recommend separating out your subs so that you can keep the sub frequency center. That's where they're going to be most powerful. And you can pan the higher frequencies, and that's not going to throw off the image too much in a weird way. So in this case, it sounds like this. With the bass over there in the left ear. But the sub stays in the center, so it can be nice and powerful low end in the center image of our mix where we'll get the most impact from it, but we can pan the bass wherever we need. So if you want to pan your bass, definitely separate it. You can also separate out your sub like I've done here. If you just want a little bit more control, if you're struggling to get your sub to sit right in your mix, separate it out. You can compress it separately. You can blend it up in separately. You can automate it to come up and down at different points in the song. So you just get more control by separating out your sub. So that's tip number 4. It's not something you have to do on every mix, but it can be really, really helpful. Now, before you go, be sure to grab the 6-step checklist to a pro mix from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. It's the process I use to mix this song. It's a process I use to mix every song. So if you think this song sounds good at all, then maybe grab that checklist and see if it will help you out as well. It's completely free from the link in the description below. And before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these tips do you think is the coolest? Let me know in the comments below. Are you going to use it in your next mix? I'd love to hear from you. And if this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you next week with another video.